It's time to give working families in this country a break. We can do that as we vote to end big oil subsidies. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.
Mr. Akaka.
You're hot.
The Senate is in a quorum call right now. Today they're discussing a bill introduced by Rhode Island Democrat Sheldon Whitehouse that would set a minimum effective tax rate for people with higher incomes. And the measure is designed to implement what Democrats call the Buffett rule. That's a reference to investor Warren Buffett's paying a lower effective tax rate than members of his staff. On the Supreme Court's last day for oral arguments on the health care law, the court considers the severability argument. That is, whether the rest of the health care law can stand if the individual mandate provision is found to be unconstitutional. Opponents of the law say that if the individual mandate is stricken, the entire health care law should be struck down as well. The government argues that if the mandate is considered unconstitutional, only two major provisions of the law would have to fall and the rest of the law can stand. We'll have this morning's arguments starting at 1 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3 TV, C-SPAN Radio, and cspan.org.
request that proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with. Thank you, Madam President. We continue the discussion today about the impact of high energy prices, high gasoline prices at the pump, what they mean to families from Alaska to New York, just the very reality that we face as a nation that is struggling still, coming out of a recession. We're worried about jobs. We're clearly worried about the high price of energy and what can be done. I think it's important to note that this is something that there are no clear and easy answers. There are no short-term, quick, flip-the-switch fixes that we can do, but there are a lot of things that we can help to make happen by either affirmative action or, in many cases, getting the government out of the way. But in doing so, I think it's important that we speak honestly about the situation before us, about what the solutions, potential solutions are, and how they really translate. In the past day or so, I've heard some comments from some of my colleagues that I think deserve a fair and an honest rebuttal, so that the conversation, the dialogue can continue and really be better understood in terms of what we're talking about with these oil and gas tax increases, because that's exactly what the Menendez proposal would do, is increase the taxes on an industry that is providing not only resources, much-needed resources for this country, but much-needed jobs. The first point that I have heard is that American taxpayers are somehow or other subsidizing the oil companies. And I think, again, it's important to put this in context. This argument, I think, rather bizarrely labels basic tax deductions somehow or other as a subsidy, as though the federal government is allowing businesses to retain more of their earned dollars, because that's what's happening here with the situation of the oil companies. They have earned the dollars, and they're basically keeping more of the dollars that they have earned. That somehow or other that action is the equivalent to handing them a check from the government, whether it's what we see with the, for instance, the situation with Solyndra, where they got a check from the government. So I think it's important to put in context that when some say that we need to end subsidies for oil companies, I think what that really translates into is raising taxes on oil production. And again, I think it's important to note and understand that this is an industry that does pay substantial taxes to the Treasury. Their taxes are already higher than we see in most other industries. The four largest companies have an effective tax rate that's over 40%. In 2010, they paid $55 billion in income taxes to federal, state, local, and foreign governments. I mean, Madam President, that's a huge sum. It probably increased along with the oil prices back in 2011. These numbers were from 2010. But when people talk about we all need to pay our fair share here, I think it is important to ask the question, how much does the industry have to pay before it's sufficiently considered to be doing its part? One of the other points of contention that has been raised by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is that raising taxes on oil companies won't increase gas prices. Well, it's certainly not going to lower them. I think we could probably agree on that. If you raise taxes on oil production, you're going to get less oil production. And it's a question that I think we need to ask. Think of, Madam President, think of any situation where if we tax it more, we will have more of it and it will be more affordable. It doesn't make sense here. But both the President and the sponsor of the legislation before us have publicly stated that more production can help lower prices, loss of oil production due to punitive taxes. I think we've seen this play out time and time again, whether it was back in the Carter administration, they advanced a failed windfall profits tax. I mentioned yesterday on the floor the example that we're seeing play out in Great Britain right now. 1 year ago, the United Kingdom decided to do essentially what's being proposed here. They reacted to high oil prices by raising taxes on the industry, and the net result was companies produced less. They diverted their investment elsewhere. In the year since the UK increased this tax, imposed its tax hikes, the production decline has tripled from 6% to 18%. They're now looking at reversing that decision and have announced new oil tax breaks to try to bring that production back. Another point that has been raised is that somehow or other oil companies are getting special treatment, and I just mentioned this a little bit. Again, the 4 largest oil companies have an effective tax rate that's over 40%, and what that means in terms of where they stack up with other industries. This is a higher effective rate than in most other industries that we would see there. Another point that has been raised, oil companies aren't investing their profits in more oil production. Now, the President seems to disagree with this statement, arguing that the U.S. is producing the most oil that it has seen in years. But the reality is, Madam President, that efforts to produce oil here in this country have been blocked or slowed by the federal government seemingly at every turn. And I think it is important to again put this in context in terms of where we are seeing increased production, because that part of the discussion is true. We are seeing increased production, but not necessarily on our federal lands. In this map of the lower 48, the federal lands are all these areas in yellow. The red dots here are operations, federal operations shale well operations on federal lands. The blue is the shale well on the private lands. So you've got a situation where 96% of all production increases have occurred on our state and on our private lands. This comes from the administration's own EIA, that we have seen production on the federal side drop under this administration. The fact that exists is that America's largest untapped oil fields, whether they are in the offshore areas, whether they are in the Mountain West, whether they're in Alaska that's not even on this map, these are still off limits under federal law. And none of these resources are counted when people say that the U.S. only has 2% of the world's reserves. I showed a chart yesterday that indicated that we're not even allowed to count these areas that have not been truly proven up. And it's because of the lands being off limits or the permitting delays that we see that the U.S. is not a larger producer of oil. And if the federal government wanted to, it could allow us to become the world's top oil producer, be virtually independent of OPEC sources. A fifth point that deserves some comment. It was the majority leader yesterday that said for every 1 cent increase per gallon of gas, big oil profits rise by $200 million. Now, presuming this figure is true in the very general sense that it has been alleged, I think my Democratic colleague appears to prefer that perhaps those profits should go to OPEC rather than to U.S. companies, to the pension holders here. In the U.S. here, at least those dollars are taxable. They support the jobs, 9.2 million jobs within the oil and gas industry, help us with a balance of trade issues. So, again, a contention that needs to be directed some commentary. Another point is that America is now a major or net exporter of oil. This was This was raised yesterday when I was on the floor by the senator from California. She says we're now a major or net exporter of oil, and this is a statement that is absolutely false and needs to be corrected. Under 15 CFR 74.2, it is illegal to export crude oil from the United States without a rare and very special waiver. And therefore, 99% of the oil that is produced here stays here. 99% of the oil produced in this country stays in this country. Only 1% of U.S. oil is exported. The very small, very insignificant exports of crude that do occur require a very extensive review process. They're typically sent to Canada or Mexico for refining purposes. Ultimately, that fuel is returned for use here in the United States. Now, in terms of exporting refined products, if that's the concern, Secretary Chu came before the Senate Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee and stated that the only refined product exports from the U.S. consist of certain types of diesel fuel and things that we don't use here in the United States. So it's a big difference between refined product and then the crude. But it is important to correct the record and demonstrate that we're not in a situation where, as a country, we are exporting our crude oil. It's inaccurate, it's totally inaccurate to say that the U.S. is running a surplus or acting as some major exporter of any of the fuels which Americans need and use to fill up their vehicles or heat their homes. And as a result, almost 90% of refined products stay here in this country. Pretty much the only things that are exported, though, are those things that we don't use. And then the last and final point that I'd like to make here, Madam President, was the statement that was again made yesterday that somehow or other Republicans only want to drill and they're not interested in renewable energy. And again, I think that that statement is a false one and needs to be corrected. I certainly coming from a producing state, believe very strongly that we need to also focus our efforts on renewable energy. Republicans are simply proposing that we pay for renewable energy research and development without raising taxes on employers and consumers. Now, I have been pushing for years now to allow for revenues from the development of ANWR to help us build out that next generation of energy source for our country. ANWR revenues alone could provide as much as $300 billion in federal revenues for renewables, depending on what the price of oil is, if Democrats would simply allow access to it. Instead, they propose to raise taxes on whatever production is taking place, hand out loan guarantees, unfortunately, to many unstable companies. I'd also point out that allowing the Keystone Pipeline has nothing to do with drilling. Neither does pressing the EPA to settle down with its regulations that are making refineries so expensive to operate, in some cases actually shutting them down. I think most Republicans also support the new CAFE standards, many of the other renewable provisions that were in the energy law passed in '07. We've passed multiple efficiency and renewable bills out of the Energy Committee just this Congress. Unfortunately, none of them have been allowed on a vote on the floor. So I think it is wrong to suggest that Republicans aren't willing to talk about anything but drilling. We just want it included in part of that discussion. When we're talking about all of the above, Madam President, I think we absolutely need to mean all of the above. And that includes increased domestic production. It includes a strong future for renewables. It must focus on conservation and efficiency. This is how we will get to a true level of energy independence and reduce our energy vulnerability and our insecurity. With that, Madam President, I know my time has expired. I would ask unanimous consent that the time during all quorum calls be divided equally. And at this time, would yield the floor.
Without objection.
And would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
While the Senate is taking a quorum call, there's been some news from the Associated Press. Former President George H.W. Bush plans to endorse Mitt Romney. He further urges the Republican Party to coalesce around the former Massachusetts governor's presidential campaign. Governor Romney's spokesman says the two will meet tomorrow in Houston, and they plan to appear together and speak to reporters. The elder Mr. Bush has offered encouraging words to Mr. Romney throughout the primary season, but had yet to officially offer his support. Former First Lady Barbara Bush has formally backed Governor Romney. She recorded automated telephone calls for him during the primary in Ohio. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, also a son of the president, endorsed Romney last week.
Requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They've been approved by the majority and the minority leaders. I'd ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, a week or so ago I came to the floor to talk about the general issues of gasoline prices and domestic energy production. I believe it's important for us to use accurate facts as we are talking about our energy challenges and we work on energy policy issues. Only by using actual facts can we identify policies that will hopefully bring down the price of gas over time, price of gasoline at the pump. So I'd like to focus on a particular aspect of our domestic production, and that is production on federally owned land. This is something which has been the subject of a lot of political discussion, both out on the presidential campaign trail and to some extent here in the Senate. Let me first note, with respect to the price of gasoline and the impact of domestic production on the price of gasoline. This chart, which I put up before, called U.S. oil production and gasoline prices during the period 1990 through 2011, I think makes the point very well. And that point is that the price of oil is set on the world market. What we produce domestically does not have a significant effect on that market. And so the red line here represents increases and decreases in domestic production of oil, and the blue line represents the price of gasoline. And clearly, there is not a lot of correlation between those two. It's worth looking again at this chart. I think it makes the point that as U.S. production has increased from 2009 to the present, oil prices have also increased. So increased production has not resulted in lower prices, and it cannot because the price of oil is set on the world market and the price of gas is pegged, in effect, pegged to the price of oil. So increased domestic production, while important for our country, and it is important for many reasons, it does not bring us lower gas prices. Our policy approach must be to find ways to use less oil and be less dependent on the volatility that we see here in world oil markets. And we know how to do that. We know how to decrease our vulnerability to those world oil markets. And we've made some, in my view, enlightened policy steps to accomplish that. We got a good start in the 2007 energy bill. It was a bipartisan bill. In that bill, we required the use of more biofuels, that is homegrown energy, which is not traded on a world market. And we required the use of those biofuels in transportation. We required that vehicles of all sizes be more efficient, more fuel efficient. We've seen dramatic results from that, and we have hopes for even greater results in the future. This chart, which was just put up here, shows the real progress we have made in reducing our reliance on imported oil. It was about 60% in 2005. It is now down closer to 45% in 2011. The Energy Information Administration projects that this progress will continue, and their projection is that under current law, if we do nothing else, imports should drop to around 38% of our oil consumption by 2020. I, for one, hope we're able to do some other things and bring that dependency on foreign oil down even more. One way to continue that improvement is to support the expansion of our renewable fuels industry and support efficient vehicle production. In the context of our debate about energy tax policy, we must use some of our limited taxpayer resources to encourage a diverse supply of energy and of fuels both. Promoting homegrown advanced biofuels and highly efficient alternative vehicles needs to remain a priority for our country. Yesterday we had a hearing in the Finance Committee's Subcommittee on Energy, Natural Resources and Infrastructure, and the purpose of that hearing was to explore how the expiration of a number of tax incentives directed at advanced biofuels and at energy efficiency and at renewable energy has affected those industries. I hope very much that we can find a way to work together to keep those incentives in place and continue to make progress in developing these alternative ways to meet our energy needs. Unfortunately, there are those involved in these discussions who persist in focusing almost entirely on how can we increase domestic production instead of on any other policy that can help us to use less oil. While we know that domestic production will not significantly impact gasoline prices, at the very least, when we discuss domestic production, I think it's important that we get the facts right. There's an ongoing misunderstanding or misstatement of the facts about the production of oil on federally owned land. And let me address that for a minute. One of the Republican candidates stated last week in the context of gasoline prices that, quote, production on government lands has gone down under Obama, end quote. Indeed, he went on to suggest that without any basis that I can determine, that increasing domestic production of oil would reduce the price of oil by $1.13 a gallon. How he came up with that number, I have no idea. But it is important that we all work from the same facts. Here are the facts. It's undisputed that overall domestic production of oil has increased, not decreased, over the last 3 years. We have a chart that makes that point, and let me put that up. This chart shows the 3 years of 2006, 7, and 8, the last 3 years of the Bush administration. We produced 1,786 million barrels of oil. During the first 3 years of the Obama administration, 2009, 10, and 11, we produced 2,027 million barrels of oil. One of the witnesses we had at a recent hearing in the Energy Committee was James Burkhart, a managing director of IHS Cambridge Energy Associates, and he described our situation in this country as the great revival of U.S. oil production. Over the last 3 years, the U.S. increase in oil production was far greater than that in any other country in the world. The United States is now the third largest oil producer in the world after Russia and Saudi Arabia. And this trend also is true if you look at the subset of domestic oil production, which we would define as federally owned resources, that is, oil production on federal land. And this chart, I think, illustrates it very well. Production on federally owned land is higher in every year of the Obama administration than it was in the previous administration. Between 2006 and 2008, as I said before, we had a total of 1.78 billion barrels of oil produced on federal land. Between 2009 and 2011, that is, the total is over 2 billion barrels being produced on federal land. Secretary Salazar testified to the Energy Committee recently that oil production from the federal Outer Continental Shelf increased by 30% between 2008 and 2010. Offshore production decreased somewhat between 2010 and 2011 because of the BP disaster in the Gulf, but it still remained higher than it was in 2008, and that production, of course, is increasing substantially again in 2012. So the Energy Information Administration suggests that clearly the decrease that was experienced in 2011 in offshore production was due to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. It projects that domestic oil production will increase over the next 10 years, in part due to ongoing development in the Gulf of Mexico. The projection is that it will increase by over 1 million barrels per day as compared to 2010. Annual production onshore on federal lands has increased by over 8 million barrels between 2008 and 2011. It is now over 111 million barrels. So oil production has always fluctuated a bit from year to year on federal lands and on private lands. There's no doubt that will continue to be the case. The important point here is that we need to put to rest once and for all the claim that the Obama administration is causing a reduction in production of federally owned resources. That simply is not the fact. We should also be aware that the industry has access to a great deal of productive federal acreage that it has not yet developed. This chart is instructive. This is total federally owned acres leased for oil and gas development as of 2011. You can see that there are 74 million acres that are currently under lease. This is federal land currently under lease, both onshore and offshore. The striking thing about this chart is that roughly 25% of this is actually being produced and producing oil and gas at this time. And there are many reasons for that. And I'm not accusing anyone of not diligently pursuing this. I'm just saying that there is a lot of land under lease, a lot of area under lease that is available for production, and I assume that the companies that have leased it are aggressively pursuing that production. This final chart that I want to show covers the number of acres offered to industry for lease on the Outer Continental Shelf, all of which were in the resource-rich central and western Gulf of Mexico, and the number of those acres actually leased. As you can see from this chart, the blue area is the area that was offered for lease but not purchased, and the red is the area that was actually leased. The administration, of course, has announced that they will have another lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico, in the central and western Gulf, and this will cover 38 million additional acres. So there is a very substantial amount of land being offered for lease. It's useful to keep in mind that federally owned oil production today is about 37% of our total domestic production. Many of our oil resources are located on private lands or on state lands, and resources from all of these areas are important in meeting our energy needs. We need to produce domestic oil and produce it responsibly. There are a lot of good national security and economic reasons for that. I've always supported doing that. But to suggest that some change in policy regarding domestic production is going to change the price of gasoline at the pump is just disingenuous. In order to move toward policies that will work to moderate the impact of gasoline prices in the future, I think it's important we be honest with our constituents and ourselves about what the factors are that influence that price. We enacted some policies in 2007 that have been helpful. I hope we can build on that work at a time and on an issue of such great importance to the future of our country. I hope we can work together and stick to the same facts. If we do that, I believe we can develop and enact policies that can provide real help in the long run to our constituents who are suffering from high gas prices. Madam President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The nation's highest court is back in session. The last of 3 days of oral arguments on the health care law. Today, they're considering whether the whole law has to go down if they strike down one portion, and a challenge by 26 states to the expansion of the Medicaid program for low-income Americans. The court will release the audio tapes of this morning's arguments this afternoon, and you can hear it at 1 Eastern over on C-SPAN 3. Then this afternoon's argument will be played back at 3:15 Eastern, also on C-SPAN 3.
Madam President, I ask for unanimous consent that I be recognized for up to 25 minutes.
We're in a quorum call.
Madam President, I ask for unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection and without objection.
Yes, thank you. Madam President, I voted against the motion to proceed to the Menendez bill on Monday because, quite frankly, it's just a bill to continue raising gas prices. Now, I talked for quite some time yesterday on the floor about this, that by raising taxes on the oil and gas industry, it sounds good to a lot of people because people don't like the oil and gas industry. They've been vilified, and so everybody thinks that we ought to gut the oil and gas industry. What they don't understand, I think they understand it, but they won't admit, is that's the way you increase prices at the pump. I mean, somebody's got to pay for all that stuff. And so even Senator Menendez and several Democrats have said that this bill is not going to lower gas prices. It would raise gas prices. And I don't think anyone who looks at it logically could come to any other conclusion. As I discussed Monday on the floor, the Democrats' plan goes against everything we know about basic economics, higher taxes, limit supply, and whenever you limit supply, prices go up. I don't think there's a person out there right now who doesn't remember back in his elementary school days the basic concepts of supply and demand. And we have this huge supply out there, but if we cut the supply, then the demand is going to be greater and the prices are going to go up. The bottom line is that President Obama and his allies don't have an answer to high gas prices. That's because high gas prices, higher prices for all of the energy that we use are exactly what they want. This administration remains committed to a cap-and-trade green agenda. It is a plan that severely restricts domestic development and drives up the price of gas and electricity. Let me put it another way. Their policies are designed to make traditional energy, recoverable traditional energy, more expensive so that their desired green energy can compete. And that's no question what the Obama administration has wanted. You all remember, and we've quoted so many times on the Senate floor, that Stephen Chu, the Secretary of Energy, told the Wall Street Journal, he said that somehow we've got to figure out, speaking on behalf of Obama and the Obama administration, not so much the Democrats or in the House and the Senate, but this is the Obama administration. He said somehow we've got to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to levels in Europe. Well, the levels in Europe were ranging at that time when he made the statement around $8. Well, we're getting up there. I mean, he's getting his way. This is something that is happening now. And we all know the infamous quote from President Obama in 2008 when he said under his cap-and-trade plan, and this is a quote now, electricity prices would necessarily skyrocket. Notice the word necessarily. It's going to happen. The President had it right. The point of the cap-and-trade regulations is to make you pay more on your utility bills. A lot of times people don't draw the connection. Energy is energy. If you raise the price of energy on utilities, on your utility bill, or gas prices at the pump, it all relates to the rest of them. If you somehow put coal out of business and so you have to use more natural gas and more gas, then that raises the price because that makes more demand for that particular product. I think most people understand that's very basic. If we are serious about lowering prices at the pump, then we need to open up the vast oil and gas reserves that we have at home to develop. After all, CRS recently reported, and this is kind of interesting because it was a CRS report. So far, I have not heard anyone counter this report. That is that we have more recoverable reserves of oil, gas, and coal than any country in the world. More than Saudi Arabia, more than China, more than Canada, all of them combined. In fact, with more than 160 billion barrels of recoverable oil, we have enough to maintain America's current rate of production and replace all of our imports from the Persian Gulf for 50 years. That's just locally. That's domestically what we could do. It's out there. A lot of them try to say, oh, no, we will only have 2% of the reserves. You know, I've said this so many times, and yet the other side just looks like they keep repeating it over and over again. They only have 2% of the reserves, and we're using some 25%, when in fact they are talking about proven reserves. Proven reserves are reserves where you have drilled and proved that there's oil there. Recoverable are the areas where you have not drilled yet because you haven't had an opportunity. So if we have a policy, as this administration has, not to allow us to drill for oil, then you can't prove anything. So the 2% means absolutely nothing. It's totally false, and the thing is, they know it. The key is recoverable. We have more recoverable reserves in fossil fuels, that's oil, gas, and coal, than any country in the world. But today we have an off-government, these regulations that prevent us from accessing it, and we're the only nation that does this. I defy anyone to tell me the name of another country that doesn't develop its own resources. They all do it. And they can't say that they don't want to do it. We have this president saying, well, we encourage them down in Brazil and Venezuela to drill, but not here. Well, anyway, we have these reserves, and we need to start doing something with it. And that's why I've introduced 3 amendments that will address President Obama's war on affordable energy, and I'm going to talk about them now. First of all, the Amendment 1974 is America's Jobs and Domestic Energy Production Act. In order to increase the development of our wealth of resources, I've introduced a substitute amendment to this bill that will open up literally billions of barrels of oil and gas for commercial development. It is something that we actually will bring down the prices, directly bring down the prices of oil, of gasoline at the pumps. First, the bill opens up significant portions of the Outer Continental Shelf to development. Right now, the entire East Coast and West Coast and in much of the Gulf of Mexico are completely off limits. For the most part, the only offshore development allowed is the western portion of the Gulf and in certain areas offshore Alaska. But you have to keep in mind, to do this, you have to get the permits, and that's where they have dragged their feet. My amendment would require the rest of the OCS to be leased over time. According to a recent study, these areas have at least 63 billion barrels of recoverable oil and up to 186 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Once brought fully online, this will create tens of thousands of new jobs and ultimately bring an additional $1.4 trillion in additional tax revenue for the government. My amendment would also require the administration to move forward with 3 lease sales that were conducted by the Bush administration but were subsequently pulled by the Obama administration after taking office. Additionally, my amendment allows ANWR on the northern slope of Alaska to be developed. Experts believe that this area contains 16.4 billion barrels of oil and 18.2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. You know, I've been up there, and people talk about ANWR and all this beautiful area. They have systems now where you can't even tell where they're developing it. And the people of Alaska, I've seen polls ranging from 70 to 85%, and I can actually identify these polls, of the people in Alaska, they want to do it. I mean, why are we, in our infinite wisdom here in Washington, D.C., to tell them up in Alaska that they can't go after their own oil and gas? I think it's ludicrous. Well, anyway, this amendment will correct that situation. My amendment removes also the statutory moratorium on the development of this resource and requires the Secretary of Interior to begin an oil and gas leasing program in the area. Today, oil shale, particularly in western states, represents some of our greatest energy potential. Just a few years ago, we didn't know this. We didn't have any idea of the size of this. Experts believe that the western states hold as much as 1.8 trillion barrels of oil, shale, and of which 800 billion barrels is presently recoverable. This is simply an astonishing amount of oil, and it would do a lot to help us lower the prices at the pump. That's what we're talking about. Everything we have talked about on the floor in opposition to the Menendez bill is something that is going to lower prices of gasoline at the pumps. My bill forces the administration to release 10 research and development leases that were approved by the Bush administration, then canceled by the Obama administration. Thereafter, the Obama administration would be forced to conduct additional oil shale leases on federal lands. We have right now on our federal lands, 93% of the federal lands are off limits, and that needs to be corrected. And lastly, my bill reserves the right to regulate hydraulic fracturing to the states. You know, I know a little bit about this because the first hydraulic fracturing that took place in this country was in my state of Oklahoma. That was 1949. Since 1949, there has not been one documented case of groundwater contamination, and it's worked beautifully. And I think most people agree now that it's better regulated by the states. The states differ in the depths of their resources, what they have to do to achieve it, and it has worked. There's no saying that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but you have to look behind the real motive of the federal government, this administration. If they can stop hydraulic fracturing, they can stop the production of oil and gas, and I believe that that is their motivation. It's a safe process. It's been successfully regulated by the states, and in the 60 years, there's not been one documented case of contamination. Because states have done such a good job of regulating fracking, I think they ought to continue in having that exclusive right. My bill does this, and that kind of takes away this temptation of the power grab by the federal government to regulate this thing that doesn't need to be regulated at the federal level, particularly when their motivation is to do away with hydraulic fracturing. You do away with hydraulic fracturing, and you talk about the when you're trying to go after the type formations, you can't extract 1 cubic foot of natural gas without using hydraulic fracturing. Well, that's what the bill does, and it would be a big win for energy production, because we all know the administration and regulations would likely prevent anyone from ever using hydraulic fracturing again. I can remember when the President was giving his speech, the last speech to the nation, the joint session, and he was talking about all of a sudden people had caught on the fact that he's had this war on fossil fuels, so he started saying nice complimentary things about good, clean natural gas. Well, I agree with everything he said. What we didn't hear him say, because he said it very fast and toward the end of his remarks, but we have to do something about hydraulic fracturing. Well, if you kill hydraulic fracturing, you can't get any of that natural gas that we're talking about. All told, by tapping into all of our domestic supply of oil and gas, we could increase our economic output by trillions of dollars over the next several decades. It could increase government tax revenues by $2 trillion, and it would create hundreds of thousands of new, well-paying jobs. We have the energy resources we need, and if we develop them, it will significantly improve our economy, and there again, lower the price at the pumps. By raising the taxes, as the Menendez bill would only make the problem worse. So I would urge the adoption of that amendment. The next one I have introduced is the Gas Regulations Act of 2012. Now, to hold the Obama administration accountable for their role in gas prices, I'm also introducing the Gas Regulation Act of 2012 as an amendment. We actually had this. We were going to try to introduce as a bill. This common sense amendment would require an interagency committee to conduct a cumulative analysis on certain of the EPA rules and actions that impact the price of gasoline and diesel fuels. My amendment is a companion amendment to a bill introduced last week by House Energy and Power Subcommittee Chairman Ed Whitfield. This amendment will help us to obtain a better understanding of the cost of all these levels of regulations. I've often talked about the regulations and what the cost is, but it's kind of masqueraded. And so let me just read to you the cost of these regulations that this administration is accountable for and that directly relate to the increased price of gas at the pumps. Tier 3 motor vehicle emissions and fuel standards. That would levy a $12 billion gas tax on refiners. Who's going to pay for it? You're going to pay for it. My wife's going to pay for it at the pumps. New source performance standards for petroleum refiners could result in billions of additional environmental and compliance costs. Again, that's going to be passed on to the ultimate consumer. The RFS, Renewable Fuel Standard 2, would force the Americans to consume 21 billion gallons of expensive biofuels like the one that the Navy procured for $26 a gallon last year instead of paying $3.50 a gallon that they normally pay for fuel. Ozone standards result in a $676.8 billion loss in GDP. Again, these standards increase directly the price of gas at the pumps. Greenhouse gas PSD. This is in the Title V permitting actions. Again, another regulation. This regulation slows down the permitting of the process and would prevent upgrading refining capacity from coming online quickly. Again, this is what causes the increase of the gas price. So it's the regulations. People know pretty much the supply and demand argument, but they don't know what these regulations do. Well, anyway, this bill is designed, this amendment, 1963, is designed to do that. Now, the next one I've introduced, or the last one I'll talk about, is the amendment number 1967. This is kind of called the Inhofe-Upton Energy Tax Prevention Act. Fred Upton, congressman over there, has actually passed this. I've introduced this now for 3 years. We've been trying to get it passed. And just yesterday we found out that President Obama fully intends to make good on his campaign promise that under his plan of cap-and-trade system, electricity prices would necessarily skyrocket. Now, that's what we're talking about with this amendment. Cap and trade, a lot of people remember. I know there are a lot of Republicans that were concerned about this issue right after Kyoto, and they said, well, let's do something about this idea that somehow you're going to have to reduce and regulate greenhouse gases in order to to do this, they're introducing cap-and-trade bills. It goes back to the Kyoto Convention, back in 1993, when the famous meeting was held in the Al Gore went down to try to put together. This is in Rio de Janeiro. This is actually 20 years ago right now that this happened. And he was going to put this together in order to come up with an international convention they called Kyoto, and they tried to, of course, get us to pass it. We looked at it, saw it was going to cost the American people between $300 and $400 billion a year. It was going to treat developing countries different from developed countries. So we didn't do it. In fact, the interesting thing about the Kyoto Treaty is that the president, and then President Clinton, never submitted it for ratification to this body. Well, anyway, after that didn't work out, they went ahead and did a second effort to do it through cap-and-trade legislation. And we beat all the cap-and-trade regulations. And the main reason we did is because it became very evident that the science was cooked. The science was all put together by the United Nations. Started way back in 1992. They developed a thing called the IPCC. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was designed in order to, I believe, cook the science to make people believe that you're going to have to do something, and that CO2 and anthropogenic gases were causing catastrophic global warming. Well, we know what's happened since that time. We know what happened about ClimateGate, the fact that they showed that they did cook the science, and consequently, we had introduced this legislation. Now, this legislation merely does one thing. The legislation will take away the jurisdiction from the jurisdiction of the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases. Now, my concern is this. Yes, we were able to stop all of these bills from passing that would have imposed a tax increase on the American people. To give you an idea how much the $300 to $400 billion would mean, in my state of Oklahoma, I keep track of the number of families that file tax returns. Then I do the math. If you do the math with what it would cost for cap and trade through the legislation that they were talking about passing, that we defeated quite handily on the floor of the Senate, it would cost each taxpayer paying family in my state of Oklahoma over $3,000 a year. Now, what would you get for it? This is the interesting thing. Even those people out there who think that I'm way off base and that I'm wrong and that in terms of CO2 and anthropogenic gases, you got to keep in mind, we asked the question to President Obama's director of the Environmental Protection Agency, you know, if we were to pass cap and trade, would this reduce CO2 emissions worldwide? She said no. Logically, it would not, because this isn't where the problem is. The problem is in China. The problem is in India. In those places is where they would have to be, and they don't regulate it to the degree that we would here. So you could carry that one step further. If you pass cap and trade, it would have the effect of increasing anthropogenic gases worldwide, because as our manufacturing base leaves the United States of America and seeks energy in those areas where there's less controls, that would have the effect of not reducing but increasing emissions. So what we would attempt to do is to take away this jurisdiction. Here's the reason we want to do that. It's bad enough when I talked about $300 to $400 billion it would cost to do cap and trade through legislation. If you do it through regulation, it's going to be a lot more for this reason. Most of the bills that were introduced, starting way back in 2003 and ending up with the Waxman-Markey bill that was just a couple of years ago, these were bills that would regulate emitters that emitted over 100,000 tons a year. However, if you do it through regulation, it has to be under the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Air Act specifically says not those entities that emit 100,000 tons a year, but those who emit 250 tons or more. Mr. President, that would be every church, every school, every hospital in America. And so that cost, we can't even approximate what that would cost. And that's what doing cap and trade by regulation would do. So, simply put, my third and my last amendment would be to do here what they've already done in the House of Representatives, and that is to take away the jurisdiction from the Environmental Protection Agency. It directly relates to the price of gas at the pumps. Now, you take these three amendments, And you amend, if the Menendez bill should get through, with these 3 amendments, we can totally stop the increase of the gas at the pumps, because that's what we're going to be faced with if we adopt the Obama-Menendez amendment. With that, I'll yield the floor.
Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, last Wednesday, I had a privilege, as did many in this body, of attending a tribute to